What if the person who swore to love you tried to murder you instead? And what if you didn't just survive? You came back from the dead, not for justice, but for vengeance. This isn't a ghost story. This is psychological warfare at its finest. He threw her into a lake, left her for dead, and told the world he was grieving. 7 years later, she showed up in his house, wearing the same dress he tried to kill her in. And what happened next? It didn't just ruin his life, it drove him to the edge of insanity. Buckle up, because this isn't just survival. This is the coldest revenge plot you've never heard of. Smash that like button, subscribe, and tell us in the comments what country you watching this from. I would love to tell more crime stories from where you're from. Now, let's get into it.
The sky over Onondaga Lake was slowly darkening, turning from dusky blue to deep indigo. Only a thin streak of sunset still illuminated the horizon as Likoi Hemming turned off the engine of his SUV in the deserted parking lot by the lake. Sitting next to him in the passenger seat was his wife, Alyssa. Her blonde hair seemed almost silver in the coming dusk. This place was special to them. 26 years ago, he had proposed to her right here. They hadn't been back here much over the years, but today Alice had asked him to bring her to the lake. She said she wanted to talk about something important. Getting out of the car, they walked slowly toward the water along the narrow path. Alice walked ahead. Her figure in a light summer dress seemed fragile against the massive shadow of her husband. The breeze brought a chill from the water, and she shivered slightly. "Cold?" Likoi asked, catching up with her. "No, it's fine," Alice replied without turning around. They stepped out onto a small wooden dock. The water was splashing quietly against the pilings, and somewhere in the distance a nightbird was croaking. Alice stopped at the very edge and looked down at the dark water, where the first stars were reflected. "I've wanted to talk to you for a long time," she began quietly. "We need a divorce." There was a heavy silence in the air, broken only by the splashing of the water. "Divorce?" Likoi asked in a tone as if he had heard a ridiculous joke. 26 years of marriage, and you suddenly decided that we need a divorce? Alice took a deep breath. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, and still she was scared. But there was nowhere to retreat. "I fell in love with another man." Likoi froze. Not a single muscle on his face did not tremble, but something changed in his eyes. Alice remembered that look. He had only looked like that a few times in all the years of their marriage, and every time it didn't bode well. "Who is he?" "It doesn't matter," Alice shook her head. "Who? Him." Likoi enunciated the words as forcefully as if he were hammering nails in. Alice straightened up. If she was going to take this step, she had to go all the way. "Ian Dorsey," she said quietly. Likoi didn't scream. He didn't explode with rage. He simply nodded slowly, as if he had received confirmation of a long-held suspicion. "Dorsey." The name sounded like a swear word. "The bandit who has half of Syracuse by the throat. Is that the scum you chose over me?" "He's not what you think he is," Alice began. "No, he's worse," Likoi's face contorted. "Are you mad, Alice? Or do you just want to humiliate me?" "I just want to be happy," she said quietly. For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of pain in his gaze, but only for a moment. Then his face petrified. "You'll never leave me for him." The first blow caught her by surprise as Likoi's fist came down on her temple. Alice staggered, her eyes darkening. She tried to pull back, but his hands were already around her throat. "No, Likoi," she wheezed, trying to tear his fingers away, but he was too strong. His eyes burned with a fury she had never seen before. Alice felt her body lift off the ground. Likoi picked her up as if she weighed nothing and threw her into the water. The cold burned her body. She tried to swim out, but Likoi was already beside her. His arms closed around her neck again, now underwater. "If it's not mine, it's no one's," he murmured, pushing her deeper and deeper. Alice struggled desperately, but his grip was too strong. Water began to fill her lungs. Her instinct for self-preservation made her stop resisting. She pretended to faint. Alice took the risk. Likoi must believe she was dead. The grip on her throat loosened. Alice forced her body to go limp, allowing herself to slowly sink deeper. Likoi was still there. She could feel his presence, though she could no longer see through the murky water. Her lungs burned from lack of oxygen, but she knew not to surface. Not now. Her life depended on it. Alice felt the bottom of the lake with her hands and slowly, trying not to create a disturbance on the surface, crawled toward the thickets of reeds. Minutes seemed like an eternity. Her lungs were bursting with pain. Finally, she reached the reeds and with trembling hands grabbed one stalk and broke it. It was hollow inside, a natural breathing tube. Alice gingerly poked the end above the surface of the water and took her first desperate breath. Air! The life-saving air filled her exhausted lungs. She lay in the silt, barely holding the end of the reed above the water, and breathed. Alice did not know how long it was before she ventured cautiously to raise her head above the water. The shore was empty. Likoi's car was gone. There was some kind of body floating near where they had tried to drown her. A woman's body, with long blonde hair. In the darkness, it could easily be mistaken for her. Fate had given her a chance to survive. Likoi saw the drowned woman and decided that the deed was done. Shivering from cold and shock, Alice slowly made her way to the shore. She needed to get to the city, to the agreed meeting place with Ian. But first, to find the strength to walk. Their meeting with Ian Dorsey had taken place 9 months ago. In Thorndon Park, Alice was returning home in the late afternoon, taking a shortcut through the park, when she heard a child crying and screaming for help. Without thinking, she turned off the lighted path. In the semi-darkness, she saw a drunken man dragging a crying teenage girl behind him. "Let her go!" Alice shouted, running closer. The man turned around, his face contorted with rage. "None of your business, bitch! Get out of here! Help me!" the girl sobbed. "He is my stepfather, he wants—" She didn't have time to finish. The man swung to hit her. Without thinking about the consequences, Alice rushed between them. She pushed the man away and covered the child with her. "Run!" she told the girl without turning around. The stepfather swayed but quickly regained his balance. He was large, drunk, and furious. "You're a dead woman!" he growled, looming over Alice. She prepared to defend herself, but at that moment, a figure emerged from the darkness. "You got a problem with women, buddy?" A low voice with a faint accent asked. A man in an expensive suit leisurely stepped closer. He was of average height, but there was something about his posture that made him seem taller. Brown hair with graying, straight features, cold, gray eyes. "Stay out of this," the stepfather snapped at him. The man in the suit smiled, but the smile didn't touch his eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked Alice, completely ignoring the drunk. "Yes," she nodded. "But the girl—" The man nodded, took out his phone and dialed a number. "Marco, meet me at Thorndon Park, North Neighborhood, quickly, and send someone to take care of the baby." He put the phone away and looked again at his stepfather, who had suddenly lost all his aggression. "Wait, you're Dorsey, aren't you?" "Now get out," the man said calmly. "And if I find out you've laid a finger on another child, you'll be found in pieces all over the state." The stepfather backed away, then turned and ran away. "Thank you," Alice said. "I'm Alice Hemming, Ian Dorsey." The man introduced himself, extending his hand. Their gazes met, and Alice felt something strange, as if an electric shock ran between them. She knew who Ian Dorsey was. Their whole encounter seemed unreal, as if fate had decided to play a cruel joke on her. "It's not often you meet a man who's willing to risk himself for a child he doesn't know," Ian said. "And you?" Alice asked. "You intervened too, didn't you?" Ian smiled, sincerely this time. "I confess I've been watching you for a long time. You come through here every night. I usually just keeping the neighborhood safe." A few minutes later, 2 men of athletic build appeared. One of them took the crying girl to the car. "We'll find her mother and make sure her stepfather doesn't hurt her again," Ian said, noticing Alice's concern. "Why are you doing this?" Alice couldn't contain her curiosity. Ian looked at her with a strange look. "Because I can," he answered simply. "Let me walk you home, Mrs. Hemming." It was the first of their many meetings. Ian was the complete opposite of Likoi, attentive, calm, able to listen. Gradually, Alice was getting to know the real him, a tough businessman with a criminal past and present. But his cruelty never touched the innocent. He had his own code of honor, which he strictly followed. Their relationship was developing at a leisurely pace. Alice couldn't deny the growing feeling for this complex man. There was a strength in him, no less powerful than Lycoi's, but channeled differently. Ian protected what he considered his own and was ruthless to his enemies, but never took his anger out on the weak. His men were distrustful of her at first, believing her to be just another one of their boss's hobbies. But gradually they noticed how Ian changes near her, becomes softer, sometimes even smiles. For Alice herself, the relationship with Ian was a breath of fresh air after years of stifling marriage. And now she was walking through the woods, soaked to the skin, her throat sore and her head buzzing with shock. Their agreed-upon meeting place was at a motel on the outskirts of town. By the time she got there, more than 2 hours had passed. She knocked on the room door with a trembling hand. Ian opened the door and froze, his normally imperturbable face contorted with horror for a moment. "Jesus, Alice." He pulled her inside and locked the door. "What happened?" "Lycoi," she wheezed, her voice barely audible after what she'd been through. "He tried to kill me." Ian sat her down on the bed, brought her a towel, and began gently wiping her wet hair. His movements were gentle, but Alice could see his hands trembling with restrained rage. "I told him about us," Alice continued. "I told him I wanted a divorce. He hit me and tried to drown me in the lake." "I'm going to kill him," Ian said quietly and calmly, and that calmness sent a chill down Alice's spine. "Tonight." Slowly. "No." Alice grabbed his arm. "He thinks I'm dead. I saw another body in the water, some woman. Lycoi mistook her for me." Ian froze, looking at her with an expression she'd never seen on his face before. Admiration mixed with something akin to awe. "You didn't just survive. You deceived him," he said slowly. "How?" Alice told him everything. How she'd held her breath, how she'd pretended to pass out, how she'd used the hollow reed to breathe. "I was lucky there was another woman's body in there," she finished. "He didn't even bother to check. Just saw the blonde hair on the water and left." Ian looked at her as if he was seeing her for the first time. "You're an amazing woman, Alice Hemming," he said quietly. "But I still want to kill him." "And what would that accomplish?" she asked. "You'll go to jail, and I'll lose you." "No. Let Lycoi think he's won. It will give us time." Ian hesitated. Alice could see the struggle on his face, lust for revenge against rational thought. "If not now, then later," he finally said. "One day he'll pay for what he did to you." "One day," Alice nodded. "But not today. Today we have to disappear." Ian reluctantly agreed. He made a few calls, and an hour later, his trusted man arrived at the motel with clean clothes for Alice and forged documents. "We're going to leave Syracuse," Ian said, as Alice changed her clothes. "We'll start a new life somewhere where Lycoi won't find us." Alice nodded. She felt a strange mixture of emotions, fear, relief, and something else she couldn't put a name to yet. Perhaps it was freedom. That night they left Syracuse. The road took them farther and farther away from the city where Alice had spent most of her life. She watched the lights go by and thought about how irrational the twists and turns of fate can be. 9 months ago, she'd been the model wife of a respected businessman. Now she was officially missing, presumed dead, and sitting in a car next to a man she'd known for less than a year, but trusted more than anyone. Ian drove silently, occasionally casting concerned glances at her. In his eyes, Alice saw not only love, but something new, a deep, almost reverent respect. How she'd survived, how she'd outsmarted Lycoi, had forever changed the way Ian looked at her, not just as a woman he loved, but as an equal, perhaps even someone he admired. For a woman used to being her husband's shadow, it was a strange but surprisingly pleasant feeling. The car raced through the night, taking them to new lives, new names, and new possibilities. Outside the window, dawn was beginning to break. Lycoi Hemming was left behind, confident that he had rid himself of an unfaithful wife. But someday, maybe many years from now, he would learn the truth, and then it would be payback time. 7 years have passed since that July night at Onondaga Lake. Lycoi Hemming, a prominent real estate developer and one of the most powerful men in Syracuse, stood at the window of his luxurious office. He stared grimly out at the cityscape, as if trying to find a hidden threat there. His business had doubled over the years. New apartment complexes, business centers, even entire neighborhoods had been rebuilt under his leadership. But Lee Koi himself has changed. "Mr. Hemming, your meeting is in 15 minutes, his secretary reminded him over the intercom. Lee Koi flinched, turning around abruptly. "Cancel the meeting," he threw irritably. "But this is the third time you've rescheduled an investor meeting," the receptionist said cautiously. "I said cancel it!" Lee Koi shouted, slamming his fist on the desk. The secretary fell silent. The whole office knew. In recent years, the boss's mood had become unpredictable. Small mistakes of subordinates, which used to get away with, could now cost a place. There were whispers around the office that something was wrong with Hemming. He shuddered at sharp sounds, sometimes froze in the middle of a conversation, staring into the void, and, as the night guard said, often stayed in the office until dawn, afraid to go home. His assistant, Guri, once found the boss asleep right at his desk. Lee Koi awoke from a nightmare with the name Alice on his lips. 1,000 kilometers away from Syracuse, in bustling Chicago, the real Alice sat behind a huge mahogany desk. In front of her lay documents concerning new shipments. Her blonde hair, gathered in a strict bundle, emphasized the delicate features of her face. Around the table sat 4 men, each of whom, in another situation, might have been intimidating. "I think we should change suppliers," Alice said calmly, putting the documents aside. "The risk is too great." "But we've been working with them for 3 years. Kevin, a thick man with the face of a boxer, objected. "We've never had a problem." "Not yet," Alice nodded. "But the police have become overly interested in their operations. There are reports of an impending raid. It's better to be safe." There was silence in the room. The 2 men looked at each other. "I agree with Alice," said the third, Marco. "It's better to be safe." The door opened and Ian Dorsey entered the room. He hadn't changed much over the years, the same cold gray eyes, the same confident gait, except for the silver in his blonde hair. "How's the meeting going?" he asked, sitting down next to Alice. "We're discussing a change of supplier," Kevin replied. "Your wife is suggesting that the Rossi people be discontinued." Ian looked at Alice. "What are the reasons?" "The police," she answered briefly. "They're getting too close. There's a risk that we'll be next." Ian just nodded. "Then we change it. Kevin, prepare a list of alternatives for tomorrow." No one was surprised that the boss made the decision without even listening to all the arguments. Over the years, everyone had gotten used to it. If Alice thought something was right, then it would be so. And it wasn't just because she was Ian's wife. 3 years ago, it had been her decision that had saved them from a full-scale police raid that had ruined a competitor's business. A year and a half ago, she'd been the first to notice that a new partner was playing a double game and had managed to warn them of the danger. And 8 months ago, her plan helped avoid a war with a Mexican cartel while preserving territory and business. After the meeting, Alice and Ian were alone. He came up behind her, putting his hands on her shoulders. "You were right about the supplies," he said quietly. "I got a call today from an informant from the police. They're preparing an operation against Rossi." Alice pressed her cheek against his arm. "So we got there in time," she said. "As usual," Ian smiled, kissing the top of her head. "What would I have done without you? I'd probably be in jail," Alice said jokingly, but there was some truth in what she said. That same evening, the whole team gathered at Dorsey's country house. In addition to Marco and Kevin, there was Vincent, the muscular man in charge of force support, Thomas, the organization's lawyer, and a few new faces. One of them, Fred, had joined the team only a few months ago on Vince's recommendation. The table was laden with food. Alice always made sure that these meetings were not only work-related, but also warm, almost familial. She sat next to Ian, wearing a simple black dress that emphasized her elegance. "Did you hear we're having trouble with the club in Syracuse?" Thomas asked when the conversation turned to business. "Some inspections?" Marco nodded. "But it's not the first time. We can handle it." "I'm surprised the mayor didn't help," Kevin said. "He usually turned a blind eye to this kind of thing." "Maybe he was offered more money," Vince grinned. Or scared, Marco added. Word is some developer's going to build a huge shopping center there. They're buying out the whole block. Alice, who had been listening quietly, suddenly jerked forward. Developer? She asked. Do you know who exactly? Not yet. Marco shook his head. I'm finding out. Fred, who was sitting at the far end of the table, snorted. Who cares who it is? We'll send a couple of guys to explain that this is our territory, and that's it. The old-timers on the team froze. Kevin coughed, choking on his wine. Marco shook his head slowly, as if to say, What an idiot you are. Ian looked up from his plate, but didn't have time to say a word. You're new, Alice said calmly, looking at Fred. So I'll explain. We don't use force until we've studied the situation. That's the first rule. Maybe this developer can be negotiated with, or we can use the situation to our advantage, or not interfere at all if it would be more profitable to open a club elsewhere. Fred blushed. I'm sorry, Mrs. Dorsey, he muttered. I didn't mean to. Just remember that, Alice nodded. Vince, brief him tomorrow, and find out what's going on with that developer. Vince nodded, casting a grim look at Fred. He shrank back, realizing that making enemies of Alice was an unacceptable luxury in this organization. After dinner, when the guests had dispersed, Ian put his arm around Alice. You were too soft on that guy, he said. He's just inexperienced, Alice shrugged. Besides, I didn't want to ruin dinner. Ian smiled, but his eyes remained serious. It's not about dinner. You've changed over the years. You've gotten wiser. Remember how you insisted on eliminating Moretti when he crossed us? Alice grinned. I do. And I remember how you said we had to think things through first. And you were right, Ian nodded. If we'd taken him out then, we would have gone to war with the Italians. And now you're saying the same things I said. Maybe I'm just a good student, Alice smiled. Or maybe we're teaching each other, Ian said quietly, kissing her. A week later, Marco called with the news. Ian's face, listening to him, grew increasingly grim. What happened? Alice asked when he finished talking. That developer, Ian said slowly. It's Lecoy Hemming. Alice froze. A name she hadn't heard in 7 years sounded like thunder. Are you sure? She asked quietly. Marco sent the pictures. It's definitely him. Ian looked at her anxiously, ready to see fear or pain. But Alice remained calm. Only her eyes darkened like a lake in a thunderstorm. We need to decide what to do, she said. It's up to you, Ian said firmly. It's your right. That same evening, Alice called an inner circle of the team. Marco, Vince, Kevin and Thomas gathered in Ian's office. There was no food or wine this time, just folders of documents and photos. We have a problem in Syracuse, Ian began. The developer who's making an attempt on our club is Lecoy Hemming. There was silence. Everyone knew who Hemming was. A big businessman, a man with connections in politics. But no one but Marco knew about his connection to Alice. Usually in cases like this, we offer a deal or use pressure, Vince said. But with his connections, that might be difficult. We could just take him out, Kevin shrugged. One shot and that's it. And attract the attention of the feds? Thomas objected. Hemming isn't a street thug. He's a businessman with serious political connections. Then we squeeze him financially, Marco suggested. Find vulnerabilities and hit them. I don't think this man can be negotiated with, Ian said quietly. He has a history of treating those who get in his way. What do you mean, boss? Vince asked. Ian looked at Alice. She nodded faintly in agreement. Lecoy Hemming tried to kill his wife 7 years ago, Ian said. Drowned her in Onondaga Lake when she asked for a divorce. There was dead silence in the room. Then Kevin whistled softly. How do you know? He asked. It wasn't on the news. Because her body was never found, Ian answered. Officially, she was reported missing, and Hemming is playing the grief-stricken husband. That, complicates matters, Vince frowned. If he's capable of that, negotiations could be dangerous. I agree with Kevin, Thomas said abruptly. Maybe it would be easier to take him out. If he's already a killer, then... No, Alice said calmly. Everyone turned to her. I have another plan, she continued. Less bloody, but more effective. "What is it?" Marco asked. "Psychological pressure," answered Alice. "Hemming has been hiding his crime for 7 years. He has built a reputation as a grieving widower. What if that reputation is shattered?" "How do you propose to do that?" Ian asked. "We don't have the evidence." "We don't need evidence for a trial." Alice shook her head. "We need to undermine his own confidence. First the little things, the strange phone calls, the letters without text, the pictures of the lake, then the women who look like his wife glimpsed in the crowds around him, the notes, calls in the middle of the night." "Are you trying to drive him crazy?" Kevin asked in surprise. "I want him to start questioning his sanity," Alice replied. "And when he's on the verge of—" She was silent, and there was a tense silence in the room. "It's unconventional," Marco said at last, "but it could work." "Reputation damage can be worse than physical elimination," Thomas nodded, "especially for a man like Hemming." "It would take longer," Kevin objected. "What about the club?" "The club isn't important," Ian said. "We can open a new one if we have to. That's not what's important right now." He looked at Alice, and everyone noticed the change in his gaze. Softer, almost tender. "If we do this, we do it on your terms," he said. Alice nodded. "Marco," Ian continued, "you're going to go back to Syracuse and gather information on Hemming, his daily routine, habits, weaknesses. Thomas, find legal leads you can use to apply pressure. Kevin, look into moving the business out of the club." "What if Hemming starts answering back?" Vince asked. "He might find out who's behind it." "He won't find out," said Ian. "We'll go through a third party." After the meeting, Marco stayed behind to talk to Alice alone. "The boss didn't tell the whole truth, did he?" he asked quietly. "You know more about this Hemming than you're saying, don't you?" Alice looked at him carefully. Marco had been with them from the beginning, from the night she had shown up, wet and shivering, at the motel on the outskirts of Syracuse. "Yes," she said at last. "I know more." "How much more?" "So much that it has to stay between us." Marco nodded silently. He didn't ask further. Over the years, he had learned to respect her decisions. A week later, the first reports from Marco came in from Syracuse. Hemming lived in the same mansion in an upscale neighborhood of the city. His daily routine was predictable: office, business dinners, rare social events. But there were some oddities. He often stayed at work late into the night, avoided Onondaga Lake, and according to his staff, suffered from nightmares. The first phase of the plan began. Leakey began receiving strange phone calls, silence in the receiver, sometimes quiet female laughter. Emails came to his work email with no text, only pictures of the lake attached. White lilies, his missing wife's favorite flowers, were found in his office twice. "He's on edge," Marco reported a month later. "He canceled several important meetings, citing ill health. His assistant says he's become suspicious, always looking around. Once even yelled at his secretary for bringing lilies into the office." "It's time to move on to the next phase," Ian decided. It was at this point that the incident with Fred occurred. The one, not knowing the whole story, started complaining to his colleagues at the bar that he didn't understand why the boss always consults his wife. "He acts like she's some kind of saint." His words were relayed by Vince, who called Ian. "I don't understand why the boss has to run around with that broad like that." Ian was quiet for a moment, then asked quietly, "What did you do, Vince?" "Nothing." "Not yet," he answered. "Thought you might want to decide for yourself. Bring him to me, tonight." When Fred stepped into Ian's office, he knew something was wrong. The entire inner circle was gathered in the room. Alice was sitting in a chair by the fireplace, quietly observing what was going on. Vince and Marco stood on either side of her like guards. "Fred," Ian said, "I'm told you have some thoughts about my wife?" Fred turned pale and threw a searing look at Vince. "Boss, I didn't mean anything by it," he began. "Just a few words at the bar. Had a few too many." "What did you say?" Fred stammered, seeing how tense everyone in the room was. "I said something like I didn't understand why you always consult her on business matters." "And the reason for this misunderstanding?" I'm new, boss. I haven't learned to keep my mouth shut yet." Ian stood up and slowly approached Fred. "Do you know why I ask my wife's opinion, Fred?" he asked quietly. "Not because she's my wife. It's because she's the best strategist I know. Ask Marco how she saved our people in Boston. Ask Kevin how she prevented a war with the Mexicans. Ask any of the old-timers and they'll tell you stories that will make your hair stand on end. There was silence in the office. Fred swallowed nervously. "I didn't know, boss," he muttered. "I apologize, Mrs. Dorsey." "Accepted," Alice said calmly. For the first time. The next morning, Fred ran into Marco in the hallway. He gestured to him. "Consider yourself very lucky," Marco said quietly. 2 years ago, a boy had disrespected Mrs. Dorsey. They found him the next day with his throat slit. "The boss himself," Fred began. "No," Marco shook his head. "Not the boss. We, his people. Because we know what she means to him, and what she's done for all of us." Fred nodded silently, mentally cursing his long tongue. A day after the incident, Ian and Alice were discussing the next phase of the plan. "I'll fly to Syracuse," Alice said. "It's time to take a personal look at the situation." "It's too dangerous," Ian frowned. "If he recognizes you, he won't. I've been dead to him for 7 years." Ian hesitated. Alice walked over to him and put her hands on his shoulders. "Trust me," she said quietly, "like I'm trusting you." He put his arms around her, pulling her close to him. "I trust you more than I trust myself," he whispered. "But if anything happens to you, it won't," Alice said confidently. "It's just a reconnaissance mission. I'll be careful." The next day, the whole inner circle was convened. Alice presented a detailed plan for the next phase of the operation. When she finished, the room was silent. "This is more sophisticated than I expected," Thomas finally said. "It's even worse than murder," Kevin said. "You don't just want to destroy him, you want him to destroy himself." Alice smiled, a cold, almost predatory smile that rarely appeared on her face. "Exactly," she said simply. And in that moment, even Ian's toughest men looked at this elegant woman with a mixed feeling of fear and admiration, knowing that her revenge would be worse than any physical reprisal. "I'm flying to Syracuse tomorrow," Alice said, closing the folder with the documents. "It's time to show Likoi that dead people sometimes come back." Likoi Hemming returned home in the late afternoon. His mansion in the upscale neighborhood of Syracuse looked exactly the same as it did 7 years ago. 3 floors of white stone, columns at the entrance, a well-tended garden. Only now it was quiet and empty. The housekeeper left at 5, and there was no one else. After Alice's disappearance, Likoi never remarried. He tossed his keys on the hall table and headed straight for the study. The last few weeks had been rough. First those strange phone calls, then the lilies in the office, then the letters with the pictures of the lake. The doctor had prescribed him a sedative, but Likoi almost didn't take it. He was afraid of losing control. In his office, he poured himself a generous portion of whiskey and collapsed into a chair. His head was buzzing with fatigue. The shopping center project that was supposed to be the pinnacle of his career had stalled. 2 investors had suddenly withdrawn without explanation. And this morning, the secretary had put a newspaper on his desk with a headline about Alice Hemming's disappearance, as if it were breaking news, not 7 years old. He took a sip of whiskey that burned his throat and tried to relax. Maybe he really needed a vacation? Or a change of scenery? Likoi rubbed the bridge of his nose, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, he almost dropped the glass. Standing in the doorway of the study was Alice. She was wearing the same light-colored dress she had worn that night by the lake. Her long, blonde hair fell loosely around her shoulders. She looked exactly the same as she had 7 years ago, except paler. "Likoi, honey, why are you so late?" she asked with a slight smile. "I was expecting you for dinner." The glass fell out of his hand and shattered on the floor. Likoi jumped up, knocking over the chair. "That's impossible!" he wheezed. "You're dead!" Alice frowned, taking a step forward. In the dim light of the table lamp, she seemed almost ghostly. "Dead?" she asked with genuine bewilderment. "What are you talking about? I've been home all day." Likoi took a step back, bumping his back against a bookcase. "No," he shook his head. "That's impossible. 7 years ago. Lake." "Lake?" Alice moved closer, and now Likoi could see every feature of her face, so familiar and impossible. "We were at the lake last night, remember? You wanted to talk. A few blocks from the Hemming mansion, in an inconspicuous van parked under the trees, Ian Dorsey was staring intensely into the monitor screens. The 5 cameras installed by Marco's men in the Lykoi house were relaying what was happening in real time. Marco and Vince sat beside him, ready for immediate action. "What a game," Vince said quietly, glancing at the monitor where Alice was staring at the pale Lykoi with perfect bewilderment. "I'd put a bullet between his eyes if I were her." "That's the difference between you and her," Ian said, not taking his eyes off the screen. "A bullet is too fast, too easy." Marco nodded silently. He'd worked with Ian the longest, and he remembered how 7 years ago he'd been ready to tear Lykoi apart with his bare hands. If it hadn't been for Alice stopping him, Hemming would have been long dead. But her plan was far more sophisticated and more effective. While Alice kept Lykoi's attention in the study, unseen work was simmering in other parts of the house. 3 men from Ian's team, dressed in black, moved silently around the mansion, transforming it from the inside out. Ricky, a former decorator and now an expert in document forgery, was quickly and carefully changing the framed photos, adding an image of Alice next to Lykoi. Each picture was perfectly framed, no signs of editing, retouching, or splicing. Working in the second-floor bedroom was Maggie, a petite woman with nimble fingers. She arranged the women's toiletries, hung clothes in the closet, laid out books and magazines. Every detail was thought out, from the bookmark in an unread book to the half-empty bottle of perfume on the dressing table. The hardest job was done by Dan, the electronics expert. He discreetly switched documents in Lykoi's desk drawers, added receipts with Alice's name on them, changed entries in his personal computer. It was a job requiring jewel-like precision and attention to detail. All 3 worked in sync, keeping in touch through miniature headphones. They knew they had no more than half an hour while Alice kept Lykoi in the office, and they couldn't afford any mistakes. In the office, Lykoi looked more and more like a man losing his mind. He backed away from Alice, shaking his head. No, he mumbled. "It's impossible. You can't be here. You've been missing for 7 years. Everyone knows that." "Lykoi," Alice's voice sounded worried. "Were you on any medication? Or maybe you had a very realistic dream?" She walked over to the bookcase and pulled out a photo album, the same one that Ricky had managed to switch out just 10 minutes ago. "Look," she said, opening it. "These are pictures of us from last year's vacation in Italy. And here's our Christmas. And here's your mom and I at her 70th birthday party." Lykoi stared at the pictures. They were real pictures, taken over the last few years, but on them, where he used to be alone or with business partners, now Alice stood next to him, smiling, alive, happy. It's fake," he breathed out. "You couldn't have been there. You weren't there. You disappeared 7 years ago." "Lykoi." There was fear in Alice's voice now. "You're really scaring me. Maybe we should call a doctor. You seem to have some kind of memory problem." Alice heard Maggie's quiet voice in her earpiece. "Bedroom's ready." "I don't have memory problems," screamed Lykoi. "You disappeared 7 years ago after you said you were leaving for Dorsey." Alice took a step back, her eyes widening in surprise. "Dorsey?" she interjected. "Who's that?" "Lykoi, what are you talking about?" "IDs have been switched," Dan reported through the earpiece. "Don't pretend!" Lykoi grabbed her by the shoulders. "Ian Dorsey, that thug you left with, the one who caused everything to happen. Lykoi, you're hurting me," Alice said quietly, but didn't try to break free. "I don't know any Ian Dorsey. I am your wife. I've always been your wife." In the van, Ian pitched forward. Alice was too close to Lykoi, and he didn't like it. "Maybe it's time to intervene," Vince asked, tensing up too. "No," Ian shook his head. "There's no signal yet. We're waiting." "All the pictures on the walls have been replaced," Ricky reported. "The facility is clear," Dan added, which meant there was no one else in the house and they could work in peace. The screen showed Lykoi letting go of Alice and recoiling as if from a ghost. "That's impossible," he muttered again. "You can't be here. This is some kind of nightmare." "Maybe you're having a nightmare," Alice suggested softly. "And now you're confusing the dream with reality?" She went to the bar and poured him a new glass of whiskey. "Here, "Drink this," she said, holding out the glass. "It'll help you calm down, and then we'll talk." "The living room and kitchen are ready," Maggie announced. Likoi took the glass with a trembling hand. If you've always been here," he began, "then why do I remember giving interviews about your disappearance? Why do I remember the police searching the lake? Why have I lived alone all these years?" "You didn't live alone, Likoi," Alice said softly. "We've been together all these years. Every day, every night. You really don't remember that?" She walked over to the desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a stack of envelopes that Dan had switched out just a few minutes ago. "Here, look," she said, holding them out to Likoi. "Our utility bills, in both our names. Here are our joint tax returns, our tickets from last year's vacation." "All the paperwork's in place," Dan confirmed through the earpiece. Likoi took the envelopes, his hands trembling more and more. They were real documents with real dates and amounts. And Alice Hemming's name appeared everywhere, along with his own. "It's a forgery," he whispered. "It has to be a forgery. You can't—" He paused, looking at the photograph on the wall, the same one Ricky had replaced among the first. It was their formal portrait, he in a strict suit, she in an elegant dress. The date on the photo was 3 years ago. "See?" Alice said softly. "We commissioned this portrait for our 23rd anniversary. You really don't remember?" Likoi looked at her with such despair that for a moment, Alice felt a prick of pity. But that feeling was immediately replaced by cold determination. She remembered his hands on her throat, the icy water of the lake, the fear and helplessness of that night. "Honey," she said, moving closer, "you're scaring me. Let's just go to bed tonight. And tomorrow, if you don't feel better, we'll see a doctor." She gently touched his arm. Likoi flinched but didn't pull away. Something resembling hope flashed in his eyes. "You really didn't disappear?" he asked quietly. "Were you always here?" "Of course," Alice smiled. "Where would I go? You're my husband, my life." In the van, Ian stared at the screen without looking away. His face was tense but calm. Next to him, Vince drummed his fingers nervously on his knee. "Boss, she's too close to him," he said. "She knows what she's doing," Ian replied quietly, though the jowls in his cheekbones said otherwise. On the screen, Likoi suddenly pulled Alice to him and hugged her tightly. She didn't resist, letting him pull her against his chest. "I was so scared," he muttered. "I thought I was going crazy." "It's okay," Alice said softly, stroking his back. "I'm here. I've always been here." Then something happened that no one expected. Likoi pulled away, took Alice's face in his palms, and kissed her. Not just touched his lips, but kissed her truly, deeply and demandingly, as one kisses a beloved woman after a long separation. There was dead silence in the van. Ian's face froze into an impenetrable mask. His hands clenched into fists so hard his knuckles turned white. Marco and Vince looked at each other, unsure of what to say. They both knew that any wrong move right now could cost Likoi Hemming his life. And maybe not just to him. On the screen, Alice froze in Likoi's arms. A second seemed like an eternity. Then she gently placed her hands on his shoulders and gave him a gentle squeeze, pulling away. "Likoi," she said softly but firmly, "you need to rest. You're not yourself today." "I'm sorry." He looked embarrassed. "Yeah, I don't know what came over me." "It's all right," Alice smiled. "Shall we go upstairs? You need to get some sleep." In the van, Ian slowly unclenched his fists. His face was still expressionless, but Marco, who had known him for years, could see the storm of emotion in his eyes. "Boss," he began cautiously, "she's playing a part. It's part of the plan." Ian nodded silently. He knew it with his mind, but seeing another man kissing his wife was almost unbearable, especially when that man was Likoi Hemming, the man who had tried to kill her. In the bedroom that Maggie had transformed into a family nest, Alice helped Likoi remove his jacket and tie. Her movements were caring, but not intimate. "Lie down," she said. "I'll get you some water." "Will you lie down with me?" Likoi asked, his voice a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Of course," Alice nodded. "As always. I'll just take a shower." In the van, Vince couldn't take it anymore. She's not going to— No, Ian interrupted him sharply. She would let him sleep and then leave. 40 minutes later, Alice left Lycoy's house and walked briskly to the agreed meeting place. She was picked up by an inconspicuous car that took her to a van. When she stepped inside, there was a tense silence in the room. Ian stood to meet her, his face still expressionless. But when their gazes met, she saw in his eyes everything he'd been through that evening. Alice walked over to him and hugged him, tightly and sincerely. "I love you," she whispered. "Only you. Always only you." Ian hugged her back, pulling her close as if he was afraid to let her go. "I know," he said quietly, "but it was hard." They stood like that for several long seconds, oblivious to the presence of the others. Then Alice pulled away and looked at the transformation team, who had already returned and were now watching them. "You were great," she said. "It worked out even better than I expected." "It's an honor to work with you, Mrs. Dorsey," Ricky said sincerely. "After you got us out of that mess in Philadelphia, we're ready for fire and water." But one of the crew, Jake, a young man who had recently joined them, was shuffling nervously from foot to foot. He obviously wanted to say something but didn't dare. "What is it, Jake?" Marco asked, noticing this. "Yep, nothing," he shook his head. "It's all right. Go ahead," Vince said. "Whatever it is, you'd better say it now." Jake took a deep breath. "It's just that kiss," he said finally. "I realize it was part of the plan, but..." "But what?" Ian asked coldly. "Well, it was cheating, wasn't it?" Jake muttered, immediately regretting what he'd said. There was dead silence in the van. Ricky and Maggie backed away from Jake as if he were a leper. Dan closed his eyes, as if he didn't want to see what was about to happen. Marco and Vince tensed, ready to intervene if necessary. Ian looked at Jake with a long, appraising stare. Then, to everyone's surprise, he laughed softly. "Jake, right?" he asked. "You've been with us, what, a month?" "2, boss," he mumbled. 2 months, Ian nodded. "And you didn't see Alice save our business when the Mexicans decided they could dictate terms to us. You didn't see her personally punish a traitor in our ranks who was leaking information to the feds. Didn't see her risk her life to get our men out of that massacre in Detroit." He paused. "But you dared to call her actions today treason," he continued quietly. "Treason, Jake, is when you betray a trust. It's when you act against the interests of those you've sworn allegiance to. Tell me, what if what my wife did today was against me or our cause?" Jake was silent, his head down. "My husband was ready to kill Lycoy 7 years ago," Alice said calmly. "With one shot, or, as Vince preferred, with a knife between the ribs. It would have been quick and easy." She stepped closer to Jake. "But what would be the point? We'd lose billions because of the attention it would draw. The murder of a powerful businessman isn't just a crime spree, it's a federal investigation. And now Marco's involved, he's ruining his own life. Everyone thinks he's losing his mind, his business is failing, his reputation is destroyed, and no one, not even the most meticulous cop, will connect it to us." "And you call that treason?" Ian asked quietly. "That my wife, for the sake of our cause, would tolerate the touch of a man who tried to kill her?" Jake looked up. There was genuine shame on his face. I wasn't thinking, boss," he said. "I apologize. You too, Mrs. Dorsey." Alice nodded, accepting the apology. "You better learn to think before you speak," she said without anger. "In our business, ill-considered words can cost lives." Later, when they were alone in the hotel room, Ian finally let out all the emotion he'd been holding back all evening. "I almost broke the monitor when he kissed you," he admitted. "If it hadn't been for Marco, who literally held my hand." "I know," Alice said quietly. "It was not easy for me either." She walked over to him and put her hands on his shoulders. "But you trusted me," she continued. "You let me do what I needed to do, even when it hurt you. That meant a lot to me." Ian put his arms around her, pulling her close to him. "I'll always trust you," he said, "even if it breaks my heart." Just as Alice had predicted, the next day when Lycoy woke up, there was no sign of her presence in the house. The book was gone from the nightstand, the woman's bathroom stall was gone, and there were no women's clothes in the closet. All the pictures that had Alice in them yesterday showed Likoi alone or with business associates again. During the night, while Likoi slept, Ian's team had infiltrated the house again and returned everything to its original state. Ricky replaced all the photos with the originals, Maggie removed all the women's belongings, and Dan returned the documents to their original appearance. They worked like a well-oiled machine, leaving no trace behind. That was only the first phase of the plan. Over the next few days, Alice appeared to Likoi in different guises, that of a caring wife, that of a ghost from the past, that of a vengeful woman who had returned from the dead. And the transformation team worked day and night, changing the environment to fit Alice's new role. 2 weeks later, the final breakdown occurred. At an important presentation of the new project, which Likoi still decided to attend, he suddenly saw Alice in the crowd, in an elegant business suit, with a notebook in her hands. It was indeed her. Alice had decided to take the risk of appearing in public, knowing that in such an environment, Likoi wouldn't be able to get too close to her. She smiled at him and waved her hand. Likoi shouted, pointing at her, telling everyone that his wife was alive and following him. But when the guards arrived at the designated spot, Alice was already gone. Vince had cleverly led her out through the service exit. That was the beginning of the end. The media picked up the story, and soon Likoi Hemming's name was all over the news. Successful businessman goes mad with grief. Hemming claims his missing wife is alive and stalking him. Investigation into Alice Hemming's disappearance may be reopened. His business began to suffer. Investors backed out of deals, partners distanced themselves, and the mall project was frozen. Likoi's mental state was deteriorating daily, and soon his assistant insisted on a medical examination. The diagnosis was disappointing, a serious mental disorder requiring treatment in a specialized clinic. Likoi was temporarily suspended from running the company. On their last night in Syracuse before returning to Chicago, Alice and Ian hosted a small dinner for the entire team. It was an evening of mixed feelings, pride in the work they had accomplished, and quiet relief that the operation had been successfully completed. After dinner, Alice and Ian stood on the shore of Onondaga Lake, the very place where 7 years ago everything could have ended, but instead a new chapter of their lives had begun. "Do you regret it?" Ian asked, looking out at the dark water. "Regret what? That we didn't kill him then? Or now?" Alice shook her head. "No, death would have been too easy a way out for him. What's happening now is the real punishment. To live in constant fear, to see everything you've built crumble, to lose your mind. It's worse than death." Ian put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her to him. "You're an amazing woman, Alice Dorsey," he said quietly. "Every day I thank fate for bringing us together." The next day they returned to Chicago. They were greeted by the whole team: Vince, Kevin, Thomas, and the others. The news from Syracuse spread quickly, and everyone wanted to congratulate the boss and his wife on the success of the operation. "I heard that Hemming has been committed to a psychiatric hospital," Kevin said as they gathered in the office. "His company's stock had dropped 30% in a week. And his competitors are already dividing up the territory," Thomas added. "The shopping center project is frozen indefinitely." "That club that started it all?" Ian asked. "What about it?" "It won't be closed," Marco grinned. The new inspector was more understanding. Everyone laughed. It was a small but symbolic victory. After the meeting, the team dispersed, some to the bar to celebrate, some to go about their business. Jake, the rookie who had thought aloud about cheating the night after the surgery, went to the smoking room on the roof of the building. Taking out his cell phone, he dialed his friend's number. "Dude, you're not going to believe this," he said, making sure no one was around. "Remember I told you about our operation in Syracuse? Well, our Bosnian wife was doing a lot of stuff there." He didn't notice the door to the roof open quietly, and Vince and Marco stopped when they heard what he said. "She was making out with that rich developer," Jake continued, chuckling into the phone. "Right in front of everyone, on camera. And the boss just sat there and watched his woman being groped by someone else. I know it's business. I know it's business. But you'd have to be such a whore to..." He didn't get a chance to finish. Vince was there in 2 steps, knocked the phone out of his hand and grabbed him by the throat, pushing him against the wall. "You..." he growled. "How dare you?" Marco didn't interfere, just picked up the phone and dropped the call. "Boss," he said on his phone, "we've got a situation on the roof." "Yeah, it's that idiot Jake." "Yeah, again." A few minutes later, Ian and Alice came up to the roof. The look on Ian's face didn't bode well. "Let him go, Vince," Alice said calmly. "Let him explain." Vince reluctantly loosened his fingers and Jake slid down the wall, gasping for air. "Yeah, boss, I didn't mean to," he started. "Shut up," Ian said quietly, and the quiet tone sent a chill down Jake's spine. "Marco, what did he say?" Marco briefly recounted the phone conversation. Ian's face stiffened more and more with each word. "I have to kill you," he said, looking at Jake, slowly and very painfully. "Boss, please," Jake pleaded. I didn't think." "Exactly," Ian agreed. "You weren't thinking about what you're saying about my wife, the woman who saved our business from total collapse, the man who risked himself for our business." He took a step forward, and Jake grimaced, expecting a blow, but instead he felt a hand on Ian's shoulder, stopping him. "Not here," Alice said quietly. "And not now." Ian looked at her, and something in her gaze made him nod. "You're right," he said. "I won't get my hands dirty." He turned to Marco. "Get rid of him." "Boss?" the man interjected. "Not like that," Ian clarified. "Just get him out of here, for good, so I never see him again." Marco nodded and picked Jake up by the scruff of his neck. "But boss," he pleaded, "where am I going to go? What am I going to do?" "That's your problem," Ian cut him off. "Be thankful you're leaving on your own 2 feet, and only because my wife doesn't like messes." He turned to Alice and took her under his arm. "Let's get out of here," he said. "We still need to discuss the expansion in Detroit." They headed for the door, leaving behind a panicked Jake and a grim-faced Marco. "Are you sure you don't want me to?" Vince began, making a distinctive gesture with his hand across his throat. "No," Alice replied calmly. "He's not worth the trouble. And then," she smiled, "I've already figured out where to send him." "Where?" Ian asked with interest. "To Hemming," Alice shrugged. "Let him work as an orderly in that clinic. He'll see every day what rash words can do." Ian laughed, putting his arm around her waist. "That's why I love you," he said. "You always come up with the perfect solution." That evening, in their penthouse suite, Alice stood at the window, looking out at the lights of Chicago at night. Ian came up behind her, putting his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "That we did a good job," she replied with a satisfied smile, "and that now we can focus on expanding in Detroit without looking back at Syracuse." Ian smiled, kissing her neck. "Always thinking about the business," he remarked. "Even now." "Isn't that why you love me?" she asked slyly, turning to him. "One of many reasons," Ian agreed, pulling her against him. "You and I are unrivaled when we're together, and we never will be." And in that moment, Ian looked at Alice with the same admiration he'd felt the first day they'd met, realizing that he'd never met a more worthy person, and he never would.
If you're into twisted true crime stories with a plot thicker than blood, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment. What would you have done if you were Alice? Let's talk justice in the comments below. Alice's story is more than just a tale of revenge. It's a chilling reminder of how strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in silence, plans in shadows, and strikes when no one expects it. One of the biggest lessons here is never underestimate the quiet ones. The woman who once stood in her husband's shadow became the architect of his downfall. She didn't use bullets or violence. She used something far more powerful, his own mind. Another key takeaway is that survival is not weakness, it's strategy. Alice didn't just survive, she redefined herself. She teaches us that after trauma, you don't return as the same person. You come back sharper, stronger, and sometimes dangerous to those who once thought they owned you. Lastly, Alice's restraint is a masterclass in emotional discipline. She could have sought immediate revenge, but instead she chose patience and precision. In a world that glorifies instant gratification, her story is a reminder. True power doesn't need to rush. It waits, and then strikes exactly where it hurts the most.